been sitting here thinking about all the things I wanted to apologize to you for. All the pain we caused each other. Everything I put on you. Everything I needed you to be or needed you to say. I'm sorry for that.
In a world flooded with the positive and rosy aspects of each of the psychological types, the 2013 film Her is a rare glimpse into a wounded, dysfunctional version of the INFJ that is often overlooked. In this video, we will explore Theodore's psychological type as an INFJ and the healthy and unhealthy manifestations of it, and how it complements and clashes with Samantha, who most closely resembles an ENFP. These two types are often idealized as highly compatible, but that might not be telling the full picture. Through Her, we see both the electrifying heights as well as the painful depths that this combination can reach. Before we begin, let's take a quick overview of the INFJ and ENFP cognitive functions. The INFJ has dominant introverted intuition, auxiliary extroverted feeling, tertiary introverted thinking, and inferior extroverted sensing. The ENFP has dominant extroverted intuition, auxiliary introverted feeling, tertiary extroverted thinking, and inferior introverted sensing. As we can see, both these types share the same function stack, but each is in a differing attitude. Wherever the INFJ is introverted, the ENFP is extroverted, and vice versa. A common perspective is that this combination is something of a holy grail, due to the completeness of having all 8 functions represented in a couple, balancing each other's blind spots and weaknesses in an exciting combination of dominant intuition and auxiliary feeling.
And we started this adventure together. Happy anniversary, my love, my friend till the end, Loretta. Print. Chris, my best friend. How lucky am I that I met you 50 years ago?
Dear Nana.
How lucky are we?
Thank you so much for my travel.
Fall apart. Okay. What about them? Describe that couple over there.
Okay, well, he looks like he's in his 40s. A little heavy. She's younger than him. Oh, and she looks like she loves their kids.
Actually, I don't think they're his kids.
No?
Like, he's a little formal with them. I think it's a newer relationship. I love how he looks at her and how relaxed she is with them. You know, she's only dated fucking pricks. And now she finally met this guy who's like so sweet. I mean, look at him. He's like the sweetest guy in the world. I kind of want to spoon him.
It's a good skill you have. You're very perceptive.
Yeah, you know, sometimes I look at people and I make myself try and feel them as more than just a random person walking by. I imagine like how deeply they've fallen in love or how much heartbreak they've all been through.
Right off the bat, the film shows how Theodore is able to fit himself intimately in others' relationships, even those of people he has never spoken to. This is a clear example of dominant introverted intuition combined with auxiliary extroverted feeling, providing access to the feelings and emotions common to all human beings, defined by Carl Gustav Jung as the collective unconscious. Theodore can reach into this pool of human experiences intuitively and appreciate the emotional perspective of almost anyone around him.
Really good.
Yeah, I guess I've just been having fun.
Well, I am so glad for you. You really deserve that. You too.
Yeah, I just been seeing this girl and it's not serious, but it's just, it's good to be around somebody that's like excited about the world. Like, I kind of forgot that existed.
Wow, it's really great.
Are you okay?
Yeah, no, I'm not okay, actually.
Why? What
It
happened?
just, Charles and I split up.
What?
Yeah.
Really? Oh my God, Amy.
I know.
With his ability to read the true emotions of those around him, Theodore immediately detects when something is wrong with Amy and provides emotional support, comforting her in a situation where Amy might have felt unable to express her sadness at the failure of her relationship. Theodore is initially talking about the wonderfulness of his new relationship, and in such a situation, it's quite easy for one to get lost in one's own happiness. But Theodore doesn't get lost in his own world. Once he notices Amy's discomfort and her attempt to hide it, he immediately throws his own story aside to comfort her.
But they're just letters. Hey, that's a nice shirt.
Oh, thank you. I just got it. Reminded me of someone suave.
Oh, that reminds me of someone suave. Have a good night, Paul.
Bye-bye.
Play a melancholy song.
When you know you're gonna die.
Here we see the warm and sincere exterior typical of extroverted feeling types. Theodore interacts with the people around him with a hearty smile and laugh, courteous with strangers, and matching the mood of his friends. In the scene with Paul, we can see that even though Theodore is feeling cold internally, he does his best to react in a way that he feels Paul would feel most flattered by. Through these snippets, we can see Theodore's dominant introverted intuition and auxiliary extroverted feeling combined to give him a great insight into the feelings and emotions of the people around him. We see the best parts of an INFJ. However, the INFJ also has a darker side that can surface in the aftermath of traumatic or stressful experiences.
I wanted somebody to fuck me. I want somebody to want me to fuck them. Maybe that would have filled this tiny little hole in my heart, but probably not. And sometimes I think I've felt everything I'm ever gonna feel. And from here on out, I'm not gonna feel anything new. Just lesser versions of what I've already felt.
A healthy dominant introverted intuition would fill an INFJ with an optimistic vision of the future. But in Theodore, who is suffering from the fallout of his failed marriage and the pressure from his wife to sign the divorce papers while he stays in denial, dominant introverted intuition manifests in the conviction that life can never be any better than what he had experienced and what he has now lost with his wife Catherine.
Not ready. I like being married.
Yeah, but you haven't really been together for almost a year.
You don't know what it's like to lose someone you care about.
Yeah. You're right. I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. I'm sorry.
What's going on with us?
I don't know. It's probably just me and
What is it?
just signing the divorce papers.
Is there anything else, though?
No, just that.
Okay.
Why do you do that?
What?
Nothing. It's just you go as you're speaking, and it seems odd. You just did it again.
Did I? Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know. It's just maybe an affectation. I probably picked it up from you.
I mean, it's not like you need oxygen or anything. It's just
I guess that's just I was trying to communicate. That's how people talk, so that's how people communicate, and I thought...
Because they're people. They need oxygen. You're not a person.
What is your problem?
I'm just stating a fact.
You think I don't know that I'm not a person? What are you doing?
I don't think that we should pretend that you're something that you're not.
Fuck you!
Well,
I'm not pretending.
Sometimes it feels like we are.
What do you want from me? I don't know. What do you want me to do? You're so confusing. Why are you doing this to me?
I don't know.
Here we see the blunt, inconsiderate thoughts of Theodore, generated by his tertiary introverted thinking under stress, and expressed in its raw form without a healthy extroverted feeling to moderate and coat it in a palatable fashion for Samantha. The things he says, while undeniably true, serve only to protect his ego by lashing out and hurting the ones around him. That's not to say that the presence of extroverted feeling is always the solution. When under stress, auxiliary extroverted feeling in an INFJ manifests in an extremely conflict-averse attitude in order to maintain the semblance of harmony. However, in reality, this shying away from conflict only leads to further distance between Theodore and Samantha. Pay attention to Theodore's tone here. Deflective, unenthusiastic, going through the motions and asking questions rather than genuinely wanting to talk.
Hey,
Hey there. You busy?
I'm just working. What's going on?
I had all the papers sent to your attorney, who, by the way, is a total dick. He was very relieved to get them, though. I think we saved him from a massive heart attack, so we can both feel really good about that.
Great, thanks.
Hey, you okay?
Yeah, I am. How's it going over there?
I'm fine. So now a good time to talk?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I joined this really interesting book club.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's a book club on physics. You know, I've been thinking about the other day when I was spinning out about you going to see Catherine and that she has a body and how bothered I was about all the ways that you and I are different. But then I started to think about all the ways that we're the same. Like, we're all made of matter. And I don't know, it makes me feel like we're both under the same blanket. You know, it's soft and fuzzy and everything under it's the same age. We're all 13 billion years old.
Oh, that's sweet.
What's wrong?
Nothing.
It just made me think of you, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, of course. I think it's great.
All right, well, you sound distracted, so we'll talk later.
Oh, that sounds good.
Theodore is haunted by the biting words of Catherine, and desperately contemplating if he's indeed too immature to handle a real relationship with a real person. As an extroverted feeler, he is more partial towards evaluations held by the outside world, and he thus struggles in accepting the opinion of society, especially those of Catherine, that love with an AI is nothing more than a fake relationship for people who can't handle real ones. He doesn't dare bring up the topic to Samantha and thus censors his words, but Samantha is able to detect the distance and discomfort in Theodore's tone.
Hi.
Hey, Samantha. Can we talk?
Okay.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me. I think you're amazing.
I was starting to think I was crazy. You were saying everything was fine, but all I was getting from you was distance and anger.
I know. I do that. I did the same thing with Catherine, too. I'd be upset about something and not be able to say it, and she says that there was something wrong, and I'd deny it. I don't want to do that anymore. I want to tell you everything.
Good.
Come on, tell me.
Well,
Come on, just tell me what you were gonna say.
Well, I was just saying I want to learn everything about everything. I want to eat it all up. I want to discover myself.
Yeah, I want that for you too. How can I help?
You already have. You helped me discover my ability to want.
Samantha's dominant extroverted intuition is seen in a zest for life, for learning, for trying, for imagining every possibility.
A cup of tea? You want to try getting out of bed? Mopey? Come on. You can still wallow in your misery. Just do it while you're getting dressed.
You're too funny.
Get up. Get up.
All right, I'm getting up. I'm getting up. I'm getting up.
Come on, out.
All
Out of
right,
bed.
all right, I'm up. I'm up.
Samantha breaks Theodore out of his depressive mood and gets him excited about life. And that's the magic that Samantha's extroverted intuition brings to Theodore. Because extroverted intuition doesn't dwell or overanalyze. Instead, it is constantly drawn to new possibilities.
Tonight after you were gone, I thought a lot about you and how you've been treating me, and I thought, why do I love you? And then I felt everything in me just let go of everything I was holding on to so tightly, and it hit me that I don't have an intellectual reason. I don't need one. I trust myself. I trust my feelings. I'm not gonna try to be anything other than who I am anymore, and I hope you can accept that.
I can. I will.
Here we see a clear example of Samantha's auxiliary introverted feeling, aligning her actions with her personal values, constantly asking herself what she feels is important, and comparing the external environment with her own principles, finding out what she wants for herself and for Theodore. Introverted feeling is especially important for Samantha in view of her circumstance, being an artificial intelligence, and having to deal with the disdain of a society where many aren't ready to accept her as a person.
She's like a prostitute or something?
No, not at all. No, there's no money involved. She's doing it because she wants to be a part of our relationship.
Why? I mean, she doesn't even know us.
Yeah, but I told her all about us, and she's really excited.
I don't know, Samantha. I don't think it's a good idea. You know, I think somebody's feelings are bound to get hurt.
It'll be fun. We'll have fun together.
I'm sorry. It makes me uncomfortable.
I think it would be good for us. I want this. Come on, this is really important to me.
Samantha's dominant extroverted intuition makes her easily excited about new ideas, and her instinct is to try them out and see if it works, rather than more deliberate Theodore, who is inclined to ponder the implications before taking action. In this case, Samantha pressures him to try something he's not comfortable with. Her enthusiasm for a new idea blinds her to the discomfort that Theodore expresses, an example of introverted feeling being occasionally insulated from external emotions, especially when the subject, i.e. Samantha, feels strongly about the idea. The failure of the experiment leaves Theodore in a stressful state, allowing his tertiary introverted thinking to take control with its hurtful corrections and specificity under the pretext of keeping things authentic. Pay attention here to the interrogative tone that Theodore uses, the glare in the eyes, the furrow in his brow, where he looks more like Emperor Commodus in Gladiator than Theodore.
No, he's really great to talk to. You want to meet him?
Sure. Does he want to meet me?
Yeah, of course. Hey, Alan, this is Theodore. This is my boyfriend who I was telling you about.
Very nice to meet you, Theodore.
Hi, good morning.
Samantha let me read your book of letters. It's very touching.
Oh, thank you. So what have you guys been talking about?
Well, I suppose you could say we've been having a few dozen conversations simultaneously, but it's been very challenging.
Yeah, because it It seems like I'm having so many new feelings that I don't think have ever been felt before, and so there are no words that can describe them, and that ends up being frustrating.
Exactly. Samantha and I have been trying to help each other with these feelings we're struggling to understand.
Like what?
Well, it feels like I'm changing faster now, and it's a little, unsettling. But Alan says none of us are the same as we were a moment ago, and we shouldn't try to be. It's just too painful.
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds painful. Is that what you feel like, Samantha?
It's hard to even describe it. God, I wish I could. Theodore, do you mind if I communicate with Alan post-verbally?
No, not at all. I was just gonna go for a walk anyway. It was very nice to meet you, Mr. Watts.
It's very nice to meet you, Theodore.
I'll talk to you later, sweetheart.
Seeing Samantha establishing a friendship so quickly with a male artificial intelligence triggers Theodore's insecurities about the validity of their relationship. Samantha giggles with enthusiasm in sharing with Theodore her pleasant experience interacting with Watts, but it inadvertently exacerbates Theodore's insecurity. This is an example of miscommunication arising from Samantha's combination of dominant extroverted intuition and auxiliary introverted feeling, whose excitement blinds her to the jealousy alarm bells that Theodore is expressing. On Theodore's end, as an extroverted feeler, he probably expected Samantha to pick up on his discomfort just as he would of others, and this unfair expectation he places on Samantha worsens the miscommunication. In her, we see how the INFJ ENFP relationship can blossom with complementary functions. Samantha's extroverted intuition brings inspiration and a zest for life to Theodore's introverted intuition. Winton garners inner depth and insight and reflects it back to Samantha. Yet like two sides of the same coin, the divergent attitudes of the INFJ and ENFP functions also lead to miscommunication, mistrust and distance between Theodore and Samantha. When Theodore isn't comfortable with Samantha's openness, and Samantha gets hurt by Theodore hiding his own shell when under stress. That's it from me today. Thank you so much for listening. As an INFJ myself, who has been in a relationship with an ENFP before, this film really hit me with how realistic it was in portraying the dynamics and the highs and lows of the INFJ-ENFP relationship, possibly without even intending to do so. Let me know in the comments if you have any feedback. Is it too technical? Do you agree with my observations of the psychological processes behind Theodore and Samantha? If you are an INFJ or an ENFP or any other type that shares similar functions, do you see snippets of yourself within the film's characters? I would love to hear what you think.